Lieutenant Sarah Chun adjusted her plain black uniform one last time before stepping through the imposing gates of Naval Base Pacific Command. The morning sun cast long shadows across the concrete pathways as she made her way toward the administrative building, her worn duffel bag slung over her shoulder. To anyone watching, she looked like just another new recruit reporting for basic training. The security guard at the main entrance barely glanced up from his newspaper as Sarah approached the desk. His nameplate read Sergeant Williams, and his weathered face suggested decades of military service. When Sarah cleared her throat softly, he looked up with the expression of someone who had seen thousands of fresh-faced trainees pass through these doors. "Morning, miss. First day?" he asked, his tone friendly but routine. "Training facilities are in Building C, straight down that hallway. Can't miss it." Sarah paused for a moment, considering whether to correct him, but something held her back. Instead, she simply nodded and offered a small smile. "Thank you, Sergeant. I appreciate the direction." As she walked away, she could hear Williams calling out to his colleague, another one for the training program. "They keep getting younger every year." The hallway stretched before her, lined with photographs of distinguished naval officers and historical moments. Sarah's eyes briefly caught on one particular photo, a ceremony from 3 years ago where she had received a commendation for excellence in strategic operations. Her younger self stood proudly in full dress uniform, medals gleaming under the photographer's lights. She wondered if anyone would make the connection, but the woman in that photo seemed like a different person entirely. Building C hummed with activity as Sarah approached. Through the large windows, she could see rows of trainees in crisp uniforms performing morning drills. Their synchronized movements spoke of weeks of intensive training, and their focused expressions reminded Sarah of her own early days in the service. Those memories felt both distant and immediate, shaped by experiences that had taken her far from these familiar training grounds. Commander Roberts was leading the session, his voice carrying clearly across the courtyard as he barked instructions. Sarah recognized him immediately. They had served together on a mission 2 years ago, though she doubted he would recognize her in her current appearance. Her hair, now shoulder-length and pulled back in a simple ponytail, was a far cry from the regulation cut she had worn during their previous encounter. The absence of any visible rank insignia completed her transformation into apparent anonymity. As Sarah stood watching the training session, a young woman approached from behind. She wore the same style of uniform as the other trainees, but something in her posture suggested she had taken on an unofficial leadership role among her peers. "You must be the new transfer everyone's been talking about," the woman said, extending her hand. "I'm Jessica Martinez, been here about 6 weeks now. Are you starting with our group?" Sarah shook Jessica's hand, noting the firm grip and direct eye contact, good signs of confidence and leadership potential. "I'm Sarah, and yes, I suppose I am starting with your group." Jessica's face brightened with genuine warmth. "That's great. It's always nice to have someone new join us. The training here is intense, but the instructors are fair. Most of them, anyway." She lowered her voice conspiratorially. "Commander Roberts can be tough, but he really knows his stuff. Word is he served under some high-ranking admiral on special operations. Never talks about it, though." The irony wasn't lost on Sarah, but she simply nodded thoughtfully. "Special operations sounds impressive. I imagine that kind of experience would make someone a very effective instructor." "Definitely," Jessica agreed. "Come on, let me introduce you to the others. We stick together here. Makes everything easier." As they walked toward the main group, Sarah observed the dynamics among the trainees. There was the usual mix of personalities she had come to expect in military training environments. The natural leaders, the quiet observers, the ones trying perhaps a little too hard to prove themselves. What struck her most was the genuine camaraderie that seemed to exist among them, something that spoke well of both the individuals involved and the training program itself. "Everyone, this is Sarah," Jessica announced as they joined a cluster of trainees taking a brief break between exercises. "She's transferring in to join our group." The introductions came quickly. Marcus, a former college athlete whose competitive nature was evident in everything he did. Elena, whose quiet intensity suggested a sharp analytical mind. David, whose easy smile and quick jokes seemed designed to keep morale high. And several others whose names and faces Sarah committed to memory with the efficiency born of years of briefings and personnel reviews. "Where are you transferring from?" Marcus asked, his curiosity evident. Most people don't join mid-session unless there's a special reason. Sarah had prepared for this question, knowing it would arise naturally. "I was doing some specialized administrative work on the East Coast." decided it was time to get back to more hands-on training. It wasn't entirely untrue. She had indeed been involved in administrative work, though of a rather different nature than anyone here would imagine. The meetings she had attended in Washington involved strategic planning at the highest levels, discussions about resource allocation, and mission priorities that would affect naval operations for years to come. Administrative work can be mind-numbing, Elena commented with obvious sympathy. Good for you for making the change. Training here is definitely hands-on. Commander Roberts appeared at that moment, his presence immediately commanding attention from the group. His eyes swept over the assembled trainees before settling on Sarah with mild curiosity. You must be our new addition, he said, his voice carrying the authority of years of command. Chun, isn't it? Yes, sir, Sarah replied, falling naturally into attention. Roberts studied her for a moment longer than strictly necessary, and Sarah wondered if something about her seemed familiar to him. But his expression remained professionally neutral as he continued. We run a tight program here, Chun. Excellence is expected, not hoped for. You'll need to catch up quickly to match the level your fellow trainees have achieved. Understood, sir, Sarah responded. I'm prepared to do whatever is necessary. Something in her tone, perhaps the quiet confidence or the way she held herself, caused Roberts to pause again. But the moment passed as he turned his attention back to the group as a whole. All right, everyone. Break time is over. We're moving to tactical exercises in the simulation center. Chun, you'll observe today and begin full participation tomorrow. As the group began moving toward their next training location, Jessica fell into step beside Sarah. Don't worry about Roberts, she said quietly. He's like that with everyone at first. Once you prove yourself, he'll ease up. Sarah appreciated the reassurance, though she suspected her relationship with Commander Roberts might develop quite differently than Jessica imagined. As they walked, she found herself genuinely enjoying the simple camaraderie of the group. There was something refreshing about being seen simply as another trainee, another face in the crowd working toward a common goal. The simulation center was an impressive facility, filled with state-of-the-art equipment designed to replicate various naval scenarios. Sarah had used similar systems before, though usually in facilities with even higher security clearances and more advanced technology. Still, she was impressed by the sophistication of the training program and the obvious thought that had gone into creating realistic learning experiences. This is where things get really interesting, Marcus said as they entered the main simulation room. Last week we did a search and rescue scenario that felt completely real. The instructors really know how to make you feel like you're actually out there. Sarah watched as the other trainees prepared for their exercise, noting their competence and professionalism. These were clearly individuals with strong potential, people who would likely go on to serve with distinction in various naval capacities. She found herself wondering about their backgrounds, their motivations for choosing military service, and where their careers might ultimately take them. The exercise began with a complex scenario involving multiple vessels and challenging weather conditions. As an observer, Sarah was positioned where she could watch both the participants and the instructors monitoring their performance. She noted the strengths and weaknesses of different team members, the communication patterns that developed under pressure, and the decision-making processes that emerged when faced with difficult choices. What impressed her most was the way the group worked together. Despite being relatively early in their training, they had already developed an effective collaborative approach. Jessica's natural leadership abilities were clearly evident, but so was her willingness to listen to input from others. Marcus's competitive nature translated into a drive for excellence that pushed the whole team to perform better. Elena's analytical skills proved invaluable when quick assessment of complex situations was required. Commander Roberts moved efficiently around the simulation center, offering guidance and corrections as needed. Sarah observed his teaching style with professional interest, noting how he balanced challenge with support, pushing the trainees to excel while providing the feedback necessary for improvement. It was clear he took his responsibilities seriously and genuinely cared about the development of those under his instruction. As the exercise progressed, Sarah found herself mentally participating despite her observer status. When the simulated scenario presented a particularly challenging navigation problem, she had to consciously resist the urge to offer suggestions. When communication between team members became confused during a crucial moment, she fought the impulse to step in and clarify the situation. These were instincts developed through years of leadership experience, reflexes that were difficult to suppress even in this unusual situation. The scenario concluded with the successful completion of the primary objective, though not without some challenges along the way. Commander Roberts gathered the group for a debrief, systematically reviewing their performance and identifying areas for improvement. His feedback was direct but constructive, focused on helping each individual understand how they could contribute more effectively to team success. Overall, solid work, Roberts concluded. Martinez, your coordination of the initial approach was textbook. Thompson, your technical analysis prevented what could have been a serious error. Williams, your communication under pressure kept everyone informed when things got complicated. He turned to address the group as a whole. Remember, in real situations, the margin for error is much smaller. What feels like a minor mistake in simulation can have serious consequences when lives are actually on the line. That's why we train to standards that exceed what you might encounter in the field. Sarah nodded slightly, thinking of missions where that principle had proven absolutely critical. The difference between training and reality was something every military professional learned eventually, but those who learned it well had a significant advantage throughout their careers. As the session concluded and the trainees began filing out of the simulation center, Jessica approached Sarah with obvious enthusiasm. So what did you think? Pretty intense, right? Tomorrow you'll be right in the middle of it, instead of watching from the sidelines. It was very impressive, Sarah replied honestly. Everyone worked together really well. That kind of teamwork doesn't develop overnight. We've been lucky, Jessica said. Good group of people, and Roberts really knows how to bring out the best in everyone. Plus, we've had some great guest instructors come through. Last month, we had someone from Strategic Command who gave an amazing presentation about long-term operational planning. Sarah's interest was piqued. Strategic Command? That must have been valuable. Absolutely. This person really understood the big picture, you know? How individual decisions connect to larger mission objectives. Made me think about the service in a completely different way. As they exited the building and headed toward the mess hall for lunch, Sarah reflected on the morning's experiences. Being seen as just another trainee was both refreshing and oddly challenging. She had grown accustomed to the immediate respect and attention that came with her actual rank and position. Here, she was starting from zero, judged only on what people could observe directly. The mess hall buzzed with conversation as various groups of personnel shared meals and discussed their daily activities. Sarah and her fellow trainees found seats at a long table near the windows, the afternoon sun streaming in to create a pleasant atmosphere for their meal. So Sarah, David said as they settled in with their trays, what's your long-term goal? Where do you see yourself in 5 years? It was a natural question among people early in their military careers, but one that put Sarah in an interesting position. Her actual 5-year plans involved strategic initiatives at the highest levels of naval command, responsibilities that were quite different from what anyone at this table would imagine. I'd like to be in a position where I can make a real difference, she said carefully. Somewhere I can use my skills to support important missions and help other people succeed. That's what I love about the service, Elena chimed in. There are so many different paths you can take. Combat operations, intelligence, logistics, training. Everyone finds their niche eventually. Marcus leaned forward with obvious interest. Have you given any thought to specialization? Some people know right away what they want to focus on. Others take time to figure it out. Sarah considered her response. Her actual specializations were in strategic planning and multi-theater operations coordination, areas that required years of experience and clearance levels that weren't typically discussed in casual conversation. I think I'm still exploring my options, she said. This training program seems like a good way to get exposure to different areas and see what resonates. Smart approach, Jessica agreed. Roberts always says that the best officers are the ones who understand multiple aspects of naval operations, not just their own specialty. The conversation flowed naturally from there, covering topics ranging from weekend plans to career aspirations to observations about base life. Sarah found herself genuinely enjoying the interaction, appreciating the straightforward nature of conversations among peers. There was something appealing about being seen simply as another person working towards similar goals, without the complexity that came with rank and responsibility. As lunch concluded and the afternoon training schedule beckoned, Sarah felt a sense of anticipation about the coming days. Tomorrow she would transition from observer to full participant, testing herself against the standards of the training program. It would be interesting to see how her years of experience translated into this particular context, and whether she could maintain her cover while still performing to her own standards of excellence. Walking back toward the training facilities, she caught sight of her reflection in a window and was struck again by how different she appeared from her usual professional persona. The woman looking back at her could indeed be mistaken for a trainee, someone just beginning their journey rather than someone who had already traveled far down the path of military service. The afternoon session focused on individual skills assessment, giving each trainee an opportunity to demonstrate proficiency in various technical areas. Sarah watched as her fellow trainees tackled challenges involving navigation, communication protocols, and equipment operation. Their competence was evident, but so were the areas where additional training would clearly be beneficial. When her turn came to demonstrate basic navigation skills, Sarah had to consciously dial back her expertise to match what would be expected from someone with her supposed background. She completed the exercise competently, but without the speed and precision that would have raised questions about her actual experience level. Commander Roberts observed each demonstration carefully, making notes and offering brief feedback. When he watched Sarah's performance, she noticed him paying particular attention to certain aspects of her technique. Again, she wondered if something seemed familiar to him, but his expression remained professionally neutral. As the day concluded and the trainees began dispersing to their evening activities, Sarah felt satisfied with how her first day had gone. She had successfully integrated into the group without raising suspicions about her true identity, while gaining valuable insights into the current state of naval training programs. Tomorrow would bring new challenges as she moved from observer to full participant, but she felt confident in her ability to maintain her cover while continuing to learn from this unique perspective on military service. The evening air was crisp as Sarah made her way to the temporary quarters that had been assigned to her. The simple room was a far cry from her usual accommodations, but there was something appealing about its Spartan functionality. As she settled in for the night, she reflected on the day's experiences and looked forward to what tomorrow might bring. The alarm buzzed at 0500 hours, just as it had every morning for the past 3 weeks. Sarah rolled out of her narrow bunk with practiced efficiency, her body automatically responding to decades of military conditioning. Through the small window of her quarters, she could see other trainees beginning their morning routines, some moving with the crisp precision of natural early risers, others still fighting the eternal battle against sleep. Her reflection in the small mirror showed the effects of 3 weeks of intensive training. The soft appearance she had cultivated when first arriving had been replaced by the lean fitness that came from daily physical challenges. Her hands, once carefully manicured for high-level meetings, now bore the small cuts and calluses that came from equipment handling and outdoor exercises. To anyone looking, she appeared to be exactly what she claimed to be, a dedicated trainee working hard to excel in her program. The mess hall hummed with its usual early morning energy as Sarah joined the line for breakfast. Conversations flowed around topics that had become familiar: weekend plans, upcoming evaluations, speculation about which advanced training programs various people might qualify for. She had become comfortable with these interactions, finding genuine pleasure in the straightforward nature of relationships based on shared experience rather than rank or political consideration. "Morning, Sarah," Jessica called out, waving her over to their usual table. "Ready for today's surprise?" Sarah raised an eyebrow as she approached with her tray. "What surprise?" "Roberts announced yesterday that we're getting a special guest instructor today," Marcus explained, his excitement evident. "Someone from Advanced Strategic Operations. Apparently, they're going to run us through some high-level scenario planning." Elena leaned forward conspiratorially. "I heard from someone in the administrative office that this person has clearance levels most of us will never even hear about. Real top-secret stuff." Sarah felt a small flutter of concern. Advanced Strategic Operations was a division she knew well. In fact, she had helped establish some of their current protocols. The possibility that someone might recognize her was suddenly very real. She would need to be particularly careful today. "Sounds intense," she said, keeping her tone neutral. "Any idea who it is?" "Nope," David replied. "Roberts is being very mysterious about the whole thing. Just said we should be prepared for something different from our usual training." As if summoned by their conversation, Commander Roberts appeared at their table. His expression was more serious than usual, carrying the weight of someone about to deliver important information. "Good morning, people. I trust you've all heard about today's special session." He paused, scanning their faces. "This is an unusual opportunity. The instructor we're hosting today normally works with personnel at much higher security levels. The fact that they're willing to spend time with trainees speaks well of this program's reputation." Sarah felt increasingly uncomfortable, but maintained her composed expression. Roberts continued addressing the group. "I want everyone on their best behavior today. This person's time is extremely valuable, and The insights you'll gain could shape your understanding of naval operations for years to come. Questions so far? When no hands went up, Roberts nodded approvingly. Good. Report to Conference Room Alpha at 0800 hours. Full dress uniforms. And bring materials for taking notes. This isn't just a demonstration. You'll be expected to participate actively. As Roberts moved on to brief other tables, the trainees looked at each other with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. Full dress uniforms, Jessica mused. When's the last time they required that for a training session? Never. As far as I can remember, Marcus replied. This person must really be important. Sarah excused herself to return to her quarters, claiming she needed extra time to prepare her uniform properly. In reality, she needed a few minutes to think through the implications of the morning's revelation. Advanced Strategic Operations employed a relatively small number of people, most of whom she knew personally or professionally. The chances of recognition were significant. As she adjusted her dress uniform in the mirror, Sarah considered her options. She could claim sudden illness and miss the session entirely, but that would raise questions and disappoint her fellow trainees. She could attend and hope that whoever was conducting the session either wouldn't recognize her or would be discreet enough not to blow her cover. Or she could find a way to position herself inconspicuously within the group. The third option seemed most viable. She would arrive early, select a seat toward the back of the conference room, and keep her participation to a minimum. With luck, she could get through the session without incident. Conference Room Alpha was larger than the usual training spaces, equipped with advanced presentation technology and arranged theater style with tiered seating. Sarah arrived among the first wave of trainees and selected a seat in the back corner, positioning herself where she would be less visible to the instructor but could still observe the proceedings clearly. Her fellow trainees filed in with obvious anticipation, their dress uniforms lending an air of formality to the gathering. Sarah noticed that several instructors had also arrived to observe, including Commander Roberts, who took a position near the front of the room. At precisely 0800 hours, the door opened, and Captain Elizabeth Warren entered the room. Sarah felt her heart skip a beat. Captain Warren was someone she knew quite well, having worked with her on several high-profile missions over the past 2 years. Warren was brilliant, dedicated, and possessed an impressive memory for faces and details. Captain Warren moved to the front of the room with confident efficiency, her bearing radiating the competence that came from years of successful command. Her uniform was impeccable, her ribbon rack telling the story of a distinguished career that included combat operations, strategic planning, and international cooperation missions. Good morning, Captain Warren began, her voice carrying easily throughout the room. I'm Captain Warren from Advanced Strategic Operations. I'm here today because Commander Roberts has convinced me that this group represents some of the finest upcoming talent in naval service. She paused to scan the room, and Sarah held her breath as Warren's eyes swept over the assembled trainees. For a moment, Warren's gaze seemed to linger on Sarah's section of the room, but she continued without apparent recognition. Today we're going to explore something most training programs don't address until much later in your careers: the relationship between tactical decisions and strategic outcomes. Every choice made at the operational level has implications that extend far beyond the immediate mission. Captain Warren activated the room's presentation system, displaying a complex diagram showing multiple naval task forces positioned across a vast area of ocean. This is a real scenario from 18 months ago. Obviously, I've modified certain details for security reasons, but the essential elements are accurate. Sarah recognized the scenario immediately. It was one she had helped plan and execute. Seeing it presented from this angle, as a training exercise rather than an active mission, was a strange experience. She found herself remembering the pressure and uncertainty that had surrounded the actual decision-making process. Your task today will be to work in teams to develop operational plans for achieving the strategic objectives I'm about to outline. But here's the twist. You'll need to do so with incomplete information, changing conditions, and resource constraints that mirror real-world limitations. Captain Warren divided the trainees into 4 teams, mixing people from different areas of expertise. Sarah found herself grouped with Jessica, Elena, and 3 trainees from other training sections she didn't know as well. They were assigned Team Delta and given a specific set of objectives to achieve within the larger scenario. Your team's primary mission, Captain Warren explained as she distributed briefing materials, is to establish secure supply lines while maintaining operational security in a contested environment. You have 3 destroyers, 1 supply ship, and limited air support. Intelligence suggests enemy submarines in the area, but their exact positions and capabilities are unknown. As the teams began their planning sessions, Sarah found herself in a difficult position. Her actual experience with similar situations gave her insights that would be invaluable to her team's success. But using that knowledge too openly would raise questions about her background and training level. Okay, team, Jessica said, taking charge as expected. Let's start by analyzing the threat environment. Elena, you're good with technical stuff. What do you think about the submarine threat? Elena studied the materials carefully. The intelligence reports suggest older submarine technology, but that doesn't mean they're not dangerous. Limited range and speed, but potentially very quiet when running on batteries. Sarah bit her tongue, knowing that the actual submarines in the original scenario had been much more advanced than the modified briefing suggested. But sharing that information would require explaining how she knew it. What about positioning? Marcus asked. Where should we establish our supply routes to minimize exposure? This was an area where Sarah could contribute without raising suspicions, since route planning was fundamental knowledge covered in basic training. The briefing mentions weather patterns and ocean currents, she said. If we can use those to our advantage, we might be able to mask some of our movement signatures. Jessica nodded approvingly. Good thinking. What else can we use for concealment? As the planning session continued, Sarah found herself walking a careful line between helpful participation and potentially revealing expertise. She made suggestions that were logical and well-reasoned, but avoided insights that would require advanced training or classified experience to obtain. Meanwhile, she kept one eye on Captain Warren, who was moving between teams to observe their progress. Warren's teaching style was impressive. She asked probing questions that forced the trainees to think through implications they might otherwise miss, but without giving away solutions or making anyone feel inadequate. When Warren approached Team Delta, Sarah lowered her head slightly and focused intently on the briefing materials spread across their table. How's the planning coming along? Warren asked, her tone encouraging. We're making good progress, Jessica replied confidently. Sarah had some excellent insights about using environmental factors for concealment. Sarah felt Warren's attention focus on her and looked up briefly to acknowledge the comment. For just a moment, their eyes met, and Sarah saw a flicker of recognition cross Warren's face. But Warren's professional composure never wavered. Environmental factors are crucial in this type of operation, Warren agreed. What specific factors are you considering? Sarah found herself compelled to respond, despite her desire to remain inconspicuous. Current patterns could mask acoustic signatures from the supply vessels, and weather forecasts suggest storm systems that could provide additional concealment for critical movement phases. Warren nodded thoughtfully. Interesting analysis. Have you considered how those same environmental factors might affect your opposition's capabilities? It was a test, Sarah realized. Warren was probing to see how deeply she had thought through the scenario. The real answer involved classified information about submarine detection capabilities, but there were logical conclusions that could be reached with just the information provided in the briefing. Storm systems would likely force submarines to operate at greater depth, reducing their ability to use periscope-based observation. That might create windows of opportunity for surface movement. Very good, Warren said, and Sarah thought she detected a subtle emphasis on the praise. Your team seems to have a solid grasp of the key factors. As Warren moved on to observe other teams, Sarah felt both relief and concern. She had handled the interaction well, but Warren's recognition was unmistakable. The question now was what Warren would do with that knowledge. The exercise continued for another 2 hours, with each team developing comprehensive operational plans and preparing presentations for the larger group. Sarah's team had produced a solid strategy that demonstrated good understanding of the principles involved, though Sarah had been careful not to push for solutions that would have required her advanced experience to develop. During the presentation phase, each team took turns explaining their approach to the assembled group. Sarah's team performed well, with Jessica handling most of the presentation while other team members answered specific questions. Sarah spoke only when directly addressed, keeping her contributions brief and focused. Captain Warren listened to each presentation with obvious attention, asking follow-up questions that revealed the depth of her expertise. Her feedback was constructive and insightful, helping the trainees understand not just what they had done right or wrong, but why those distinctions mattered in real-world operations. The most important lesson from today's exercise Warren concluded as the session drew to a close, is that successful operations require both tactical competence and strategic awareness. Every decision you make, no matter how small it might seem, contributes to larger outcomes. She paused to look around the room, her gaze briefly meeting Sarah's once again. Military service is ultimately about serving something larger than yourself. The skills you develop here will be tested in real situations where the stakes are much higher than any training exercise. Remember that responsibility. As the session ended and trainees began filing out of the conference room, Sarah moved with the crowd toward the exit. She had almost reached the door when she heard Captain Warren call out, "Miss Chun, could I speak with you for a moment?" Sarah's heart sank, but she turned back with what she hoped was an appropriately puzzled expression. "Yes, ma'am." Warren waited until the room had cleared before approaching. Her expression was thoughtful, but not accusatory. "You showed some very sophisticated thinking during today's exercise. Your analysis of environmental factors was particularly impressive." "Thank you, ma'am. I found the scenario very challenging and interesting." Warren studied Sarah's face carefully. "Your background is listed as administrative work on the East Coast." "What kind of administrative work?" Sarah had prepared for this question, but hoped she wouldn't need to use her answer. "Personnel coordination and logistics support, mostly. Nothing as exciting as today's exercise." "Personnel coordination," Warren repeated slowly. "That would certainly provide exposure to operational planning concepts." She paused, clearly considering her next words carefully. "Tell me, Miss Chun, have we met before? You seem familiar somehow." It was the moment Sarah had been dreading. She could continue the deception, but lying directly to a superior officer went against everything she believed in. On the other hand, revealing her true identity could compromise whatever remained of her unusual training experience. "I don't believe so, ma'am," Sarah said, hoping her voice sounded steadier than she felt. "Though I suppose it's possible our paths crossed briefly during some administrative function." Warren nodded slowly, but her expression suggested she wasn't entirely convinced. "Well, regardless, I was impressed with your contributions today. You have good instincts and clear thinking. I suspect you'll do very well in whatever career path you choose." "Thank you, ma'am. I appreciate the encouragement." As Sarah finally left the conference room, she felt as though she had survived an interrogation. Captain Warren clearly suspected something, but professional courtesy and the lack of obvious evidence had prevented her from pushing the issue further. The rest of the day passed in something of a blur. Her fellow trainees were excited about the morning's exercise and eager to discuss the insights they had gained. Sarah participated in these conversations, but found herself distracted by concerns about whether Captain Warren would pursue her suspicions. During the afternoon's physical training session, Sarah pushed herself harder than usual, using the physical exertion as a way to work through her mental stress. The obstacle course that had seemed challenging 3 weeks ago now felt routine, her body having adapted to the demands of daily training. "You're really pushing yourself today," Jessica observed as they completed the final segment of the course. "Everything okay?" Sarah appreciated the concern, but wasn't sure how to address it honestly. "Just feeling energized after this morning's session, I guess. It's exciting to get exposure to that level of strategic thinking." Warren was really impressive. Marcus agreed as he joined them. "Did you see how she could take any question and connect it to bigger picture issues? That's the kind of expertise I hope to develop eventually." Elena nodded enthusiastically. The way she broke down complex scenarios into manageable decision points was amazing. "I never thought about operations planning from that perspective before." Sarah found herself genuinely enjoying this discussion, despite her personal concerns about the morning's events. Her fellow trainees' enthusiasm was infectious, and their insights about Captain Warren's presentation were often quite perceptive. It reminded her why she had been drawn to military service in the first place: the opportunity to work with intelligent, dedicated people committed to important missions. As evening approached, and the day's official training concluded, Sarah made her way to the base library. She had discovered this quiet space during her second week, and had taken to spending time there when she needed to think through personal or professional challenges. The library was usually nearly empty during evening hours, providing a peaceful environment for reflection. She selected a table near the back of the main reading room and opened a book on naval history, though her mind was far from the text in front of her. The day's events had reminded her of the complexity of her current situation. What had started as a simple desire to experience training from a different perspective had evolved into something more complicated. 3 weeks of living as a trainee had given her insights into contemporary naval training that would never have been available from her usual perspective. She had observed teaching methods, identified strengths and weaknesses in current programs, and gained understanding of how the next generation of naval officers was being prepared for service. This information would be invaluable in her actual role, but the experience had also been personally meaningful in ways she hadn't anticipated. The straightforward relationships, the focus on basic competence over political considerations, the sense of shared purpose among people working towards similar goals. All of this had reminded her of aspects of military service that sometimes got lost in higher-level positions. As she sat in the quiet library, Sarah found herself wondering whether she could maintain her cover for the remaining weeks of the training program. Captain Warren's recognition was a complication, but not necessarily a fatal one. If she could avoid further encounters with senior officers who might know her, she might be able to complete the experience without additional incident. The evening hours passed peacefully as Sarah reviewed the day's events and planned for tomorrow's challenges. By the time she returned to her quarters, she had resolved to continue her unusual assignment while remaining alert to potential complications. The insights she was gaining were too valuable to abandon lightly, both professionally and personally. As she prepared for sleep, Sarah reflected on how much her daily routine had changed over the past 3 weeks. The simple rhythms of training life, early mornings, physical challenges, shared meals, evening study time, had become comfortable and familiar. There was something appealing about this structured existence, so different from the complex scheduling and constant decision-making that characterized her usual responsibilities. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities to learn. Despite the day's complications, Sarah looked forward to continuing her unique perspective on military training and service. 6 weeks into her training program, Sarah had found a rhythm that balanced her dual existence with increasing skill. The morning reveille at 0500 no longer felt jarring, and her body had adapted completely to the physical demands of daily training. More importantly, she had become fully integrated into her training group, earning genuine respect for her contributions and developing friendships that felt surprisingly authentic despite the fundamental deception at their core. The friendship with Jessica had deepened beyond simple training camaraderie. They had become study partners, workout companions, and confidants in the way that often developed between people sharing intense experiences. Jessica's natural leadership abilities had flourished during the program, and Sarah found herself genuinely proud of her friend's development, even knowing that Jessica might feel betrayed if she ever learned the truth about Sarah's identity. On this particular morning, Sarah was reviewing navigation charts in the base library when Commander Roberts approached her table. His expression was more serious than usual, and Sarah immediately sensed that something significant was about to occur. "Chun, I need to speak with you privately," Roberts said, his voice carrying the weight of official business. "My office, 15 minutes. Sarah nodded, trying to keep her expression neutral despite the immediate spike of concern. Roberts' office was not a place trainees visited casually, and his formal tone suggested this was not a routine check-in about her progress. The walk to the administrative building felt longer than usual, her mind racing through possible explanations for the summons. Had Captain Warren filed some kind of report about their interaction? Had someone else recognized her? Was there some security concern that required her immediate attention? Commander Roberts' office was spartanly decorated but functionally efficient, its walls lined with commendations, photographs from various assignments, and nautical charts. Roberts gestured for Sarah to take a seat in one of the 2 chairs positioned in front of his desk before settling into his own chair with obvious deliberation. "I'll get straight to the point, Chun," Roberts began, leaning forward slightly. "I've been reviewing your file, and there are some inconsistencies that concern me." Sarah felt her heart rate increase, but maintained her composure. "What kind of inconsistencies, sir?" "Your performance scores are exceptionally high across all areas. Physical fitness, technical competence, tactical reasoning, leadership potential. You're scoring at levels we typically see only from trainees with significant prior experience." Roberts paused, studying her reaction. "Yet your background check shows only administrative work." This was the moment Sarah had hoped to avoid, but she had prepared for it nonetheless. "I tried to stay in good physical condition during my administrative assignment, sir, and I spent considerable time studying naval procedures and tactics, hoping eventually to transition to more operational duties." Roberts nodded slowly, but his expression remained skeptical. "That's admirable, Chun. But what you're demonstrating goes beyond what personal study could account for. Yesterday's tactical exercise, for example, Your solution to the multi-threat scenario was something I would expect from someone with actual operational experience. Sarah recognized that Roberts was too experienced an officer to be easily deceived. Her performance throughout the program had inevitably revealed competencies that exceeded what her supposed background could explain. The question now was how to handle his suspicions without compromising her mission or breaking her cover entirely. Sir, I may have understated my background somewhat, Sarah said carefully. My administrative work did involve liaison with operational units. I had opportunities to observe exercises and briefings that gave me more exposure to tactical thinking than might be apparent from my official assignments. It wasn't entirely untrue. Liaison work was indeed part of her actual responsibilities, though at a much higher level than she was implying. Roberts continued to study her with the intense attention of someone trying to solve a puzzle. I've been in this business for 22 years, Chun. I've seen thousands of trainees come through programs like this one. There's something about you that doesn't add up. Roberts leaned back in his chair. I'm not accusing you of anything inappropriate, but I have a responsibility to understand who I'm training and why they are here. Sarah felt the weight of her deception more heavily than ever before. Commander Roberts was a good officer doing his job responsibly, and her presence in his program was putting him in a difficult position without his knowledge or consent. Sir, I understand your concerns, Sarah said. All I can tell you is that I'm here because I genuinely want to learn from this training program. Whatever background I may have had, I believe there's value in experiencing the perspective of a trainee rather than approaching everything from a supervisory or administrative viewpoint. Roberts was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing her words against his professional instincts. When he spoke again, his tone was more thoughtful than confrontational. You know, Chun, there's something about your bearing that reminds me of officers I've served under. People with real command experience. The way you carry yourself, how you process information, your instinctive responses to leadership situations. He paused. If you were someone with significant experience choosing to go through basic training for educational purposes, that would actually make sense to me. Sarah felt as though Roberts was offering her an opportunity to acknowledge her true status without forcing a direct confrontation. But revealing her identity, even partially, would fundamentally change her remaining time in the program and potentially compromise the insights she was still gaining. I appreciate your confidence in my abilities, sir, Sarah replied. All I can say is that I'm committed to completing this program to the best of my ability and learning everything I can from the experience. Roberts studied her for another moment before nodding slowly. Fair enough, Chun. I won't press the issue further, but I want you to understand something. The people in your training group look up to you. You've become a leader among them, whether you intended to or not. That comes with responsibilities. I understand, sir. Good. Then, let's talk about what happens next. Roberts pulled out a folder and opened it on his desk. Based on your performance, you're being recommended for advanced training opportunities. Specifically, the Advanced Leadership Development Program and the Strategic Operations Track. Sarah felt a momentary surge of panic. Both programs Roberts had mentioned involved security clearance reviews and background investigations that would immediately reveal her true identity. Accepting those recommendations would end her current mission, while declining them would raise additional questions about her motivations. Those are significant opportunities, sir, Sarah said, buying time to think. They are indeed. The Strategic Operations Track, in particular, is offered to fewer than 5% of trainees. It's designed for individuals who show exceptional potential for high-level command positions. Roberts leaned forward again. The thing is, Chun, someone with your apparent capabilities would normally be expected to pursue these opportunities. Declining them without good reason would be unusual. Sarah realized that her success in the training program had created a trap. Performing at her actual capability level had led to opportunities that she couldn't accept without compromising her cover, but declining them would raise the very suspicions she had been trying to avoid. Could I have some time to consider these opportunities, sir? They represent significant commitments, and I want to be certain I could give them the attention they deserve. Of course, take the weekend to think it over. But, Chun, Roberts added, his voice taking on a more serious tone, I'll need an answer by Monday morning. These programs have limited enrollment periods, and slots are allocated based on current recommendations. Sarah left Roberts' office with her mind churning. The weekend would give her time to consider her options, but none of them seemed particularly appealing. She could reveal her true identity to Roberts and request his discretion, but that would end her unique training experience. She could decline the advanced programs and accept whatever suspicions that might generate. Or she could find some third alternative that allowed her to maintain her cover while addressing Robert's legitimate concerns. The mess hall was buzzing with Friday afternoon energy when Sarah arrived for lunch. Her fellow trainees were discussing weekend plans and sharing gossip about various training programs and instructor assignments. The normalcy of their conversations felt surreal given the morning's complications. "You look like someone stole your weekend liberty," Marcus observed as Sarah sat down with her tray. "Everything okay?" Before Sarah could answer, Jessica leaned forward with obvious excitement. "Did you hear about the advanced program recommendations? Roberts called Elena and David into his office this morning too." Sarah felt a surge of relief. If other trainees were also being considered for advanced programs, her situation might be less unusual than she had feared. "Really? What programs are they being recommended for?" Sarah asked. "Elena's being recommended for the technical specialization track, and David for the leadership development program," Jessica replied. "It's amazing, for people from our group getting advanced recommendations. Roberts must really think highly of our performance." Marcus nodded enthusiastically. "It makes sense. We've been consistently scoring higher than other training groups in most exercises. What about you, Sarah? Did Roberts mention any recommendations?" Sarah found herself in the uncomfortable position of needing to discuss her morning meeting without revealing its true significance. "He mentioned a couple of programs, but wanted me to take the weekend to consider them." "That's fantastic," Elena said, joining the conversation as she approached the table. "I'm so excited about the technical track. It's exactly what I was hoping for when I started this program." David appeared moments later with an expression of barely contained enthusiasm. "This is unbelievable. The leadership development program could open doors I never imagined." "What programs are you considering, Sarah?" The genuine excitement and happiness of her friends made Sarah's deception feel even more burdensome. These people had welcomed her, supported her, and celebrated her successes without reservation. Their trust and friendship had become genuinely important to her, yet she was maintaining a fundamental lie about who she was and why she was there. "Leadership development and strategic operations track," Sarah replied, deciding that honesty about this much, at least, was possible. The table fell silent for a moment as the significance of those recommendations sank in. "Strategic operations?" Jessica said, her voice filled with awe. "That's like the highest level of advanced training. I've heard they only accept a handful of people each year." Marcus shook his head in amazement. "I knew you were sharp, Sarah, but that's incredible recognition. You must have really impressed Roberts." As the conversation continued around her, Sarah found herself observing her friends with new eyes. Their genuine enthusiasm for each other's success, their willingness to celebrate achievements without jealousy or competition, their shared commitment to excellence. These were the qualities that made military service meaningful at its best. Elena leaned closer to Sarah with a conspiratorial expression. "So what are you thinking? Are you going to accept both recommendations?" It was a perfectly reasonable question that Sarah couldn't answer honestly. Her actual career path was already well established, and neither of the programs Roberts had mentioned would add meaningfully to her existing qualifications. More importantly, accepting either recommendation would require background investigations that would immediately expose her true identity. "I'm still weighing my options," Sarah said. "These are big decisions that could affect my entire career path." "That's smart," David agreed. "No point in rushing into something this important. But, honestly, Sarah, with recommendations like that, you're looking at fast-track career progression. You could be in significant command positions within a few years." The irony of David's comment wasn't lost on Sarah, but she simply nodded thoughtfully. "The opportunity is definitely exciting." As lunch concluded and the afternoon training schedule beckoned, Sarah found herself looking forward to the physical challenges ahead. The afternoon's obstacle course exercise would provide a welcome distraction from the morning's complications and the weekend's looming decisions. The obstacle course had evolved considerably since Sarah's first week in the program. What had initially been a challenging but manageable series of physical tasks had become increasingly complex, incorporating elements of team coordination, problem-solving under pressure, and tactical decision-making. Today's course included several new elements designed to test not just individual performance, but group dynamics and leadership capabilities. Sarah's team for the exercise included Jessica, Marcus, and 2 trainees from another section whom she knew less well. As they studied the course layout and planned their approach, Sarah found herself naturally taking on a leadership role despite her conscious efforts to remain less conspicuous. The rope bridge section is going to be our biggest challenge, Marcus observed, pointing to a particularly complex obstacle involving multiple rope crossings and equipment transfers. If we don't coordinate properly there, we could lose significant time. Sarah studied the obstacle with practiced eyes, immediately identifying the optimal approach based on her extensive experience with similar challenges. But sharing that insight directly would require explaining expertise she supposedly didn't possess. What if we think about it as a logistics problem rather than just a physical challenge? Sarah suggested. The order in which people cross, how we transfer equipment, timing of movements, all of that could be planned in advance. Jessica nodded approvingly. That's a good perspective. Let's work through the sequence step by step. As they developed their plan, Sarah found herself walking the familiar line between helpful participation and potentially revealing too much expertise. She made suggestions that were logical and well-reasoned, but avoided insights that would require advanced training to develop. The exercise itself went smoothly, with Sarah's team completing the course in the second-best time recorded for the day. Their success was due largely to the careful planning they had done beforehand and the effective teamwork that had become characteristic of their group. Commander Roberts observed the exercise from various positions along the course, making notes and offering occasional guidance to teams that encountered difficulties. When Sarah's team finished, he approached them with obvious satisfaction. Excellent work, people. Your planning phase was particularly impressive. That kind of methodical approach to complex challenges will serve you well throughout your careers. Robert's eyes met Sarah's briefly as he spoke, and she sensed that his morning concerns remained unresolved despite his professional praise for the team's performance. As the afternoon concluded and evening liberty began, Sarah found herself facing a weekend of difficult decisions. The advanced program recommendations represented opportunities that any genuine trainee would be excited to pursue, but accepting them would end her unique training experience. Declining them, however, would generate suspicions that might prove even more problematic. The base recreation center was bustling with Friday evening activity as Sarah made her way through its halls. Groups of personnel engaged in various leisure activities, some playing pool or table tennis, others watching movies or reading in quiet corners. The normal rhythms of base life provided a comforting backdrop for her troubled thoughts. She settled into a quiet corner of the library with a book on naval history, using the familiar activity as a way to organize her thinking. The problem she faced was essentially one of competing loyalties and responsibilities. Her mission as a senior officer seeking to understand contemporary training methods had been valuable and successful, but it had also created unexpected complications. Her genuine friendships with fellow trainees represented something precious that she was reluctant to jeopardize. The insights she had gained into current training methods and the development of junior officers had exceeded her expectations. But the success of her performance had inevitably led to opportunities and recognitions that threatened to expose her true identity. As evening turned to night and the recreation center gradually emptied, Sarah remained in the library, working through the implications of her various options. By the time she returned to her quarters, she had not reached a definitive decision, but she had clarified the factors that would influence her choice. Saturday morning brought crisp autumn air and the blessed absence of scheduled training activities. Sarah used the free time for a long run along the base perimeter, letting the physical exertion clear her mind while she continued to wrestle with her decision. The weekend stretched ahead with its promise of temporary escape from training pressures, but Sarah knew that Monday morning would arrive with its demand for resolution. Whatever she decided about the advanced program recommendations would fundamentally alter the trajectory of her unique training experience. As she completed her run and headed toward the mess hall for breakfast, Sarah realized that the weekend would not just be about making a decision. It would be about determining what kind of person she wanted to be and what kinds of relationships and experiences she was willing to sacrifice in service of her broader responsibilities. Monday morning arrived with the weight of inevitability. Sarah had spent the weekend wrestling with her decision, alternating between moments of clarity and periods of intense uncertainty. The simple question of whether to accept advanced program recommendations had become entangled with larger questions about duty, friendship, and the price of deception. She had made her choice, but implementing it would require careful navigation of the consequences. Commander Roberts was waiting in his office when Sarah arrived at the appointed time. His expression was professionally neutral, but she could sense the underlying tension of someone who knew that important decisions hung in the balance. Good morning, Chun. I trust you had a productive weekend thinking things over. Yes, sir. I did. Sarah settled into the chair across from his desk, noting that he had prepared a fresh folder of materials, presumably the paperwork for whichever programs she might choose to pursue. Before you tell me your decision, Robert said, I want you to understand something about opportunity in military service. Chances like these don't come along often, and they rarely come to people who aren't ready to seize them. Sarah appreciated his concern, even knowing that it was based on incomplete information about her situation. I understand the significance of these opportunities, sir. Good. Then, what's your decision? Sarah had rehearsed this moment, but actually speaking the words still felt difficult. I'm declining both recommendations, sir. Roberts leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting from professional neutrality to obvious concern. That's unexpected, Chun. May I ask why? I believe I would benefit from completing the current training program before moving on to more specialized tracks, Sarah said, offering the explanation she had prepared. I want to ensure I have a solid foundation before taking on advanced responsibilities. It was a reasonable-sounding explanation, but Sarah could see that Roberts wasn't entirely convinced. He studied her face carefully before responding. Chun, I've been training officers for more than a decade. In my experience, people who decline opportunities like these usually have specific reasons that go beyond wanting to strengthen their foundations. Roberts paused. Is there something you're not telling me? The direct question hung between them like a challenge. Sarah realized that Roberts suspected the truth about her identity, or at least part of it. His military experience and instincts were telling him that her behavior didn't match her supposed background, and he was giving her an opportunity to explain. Sir, all I can say is that I'm here because I believe this training program has value for me personally and professionally. I'd like to complete it fully before considering other opportunities. Roberts was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing his response. When he spoke again, his tone was more formal than it had been moments before. Very well, Chun. Your decision is your own to make. However, I need you to understand that declining these recommendations will be noted in your file. Future opportunities may be affected by this choice. I understand, sir. Furthermore, Roberts continued, I'll be watching your performance more closely going forward. If there are factors affecting your decision-making that I should know about, I expect you to bring them to my attention. Sarah recognized the implicit warning in his words. Roberts was putting her on notice that her behavior would be scrutinized, and any further inconsistencies would be investigated more thoroughly. Understood, sir. As Sarah left Roberts' office, she felt both relief and apprehension. She had bought herself time to continue the training program, but at the cost of generating additional suspicion. The delicate balance she had maintained for 7 weeks was becoming increasingly unstable. The morning's first training session was a tactical communications exercise, requiring teams to coordinate complex operations using only radio contact. Sarah's group had become highly effective at these challenges, developing communication protocols and decision-making processes that consistently produced superior results. But, as the exercise progressed, Sarah noticed that Commander Roberts was observing their team more closely than usual. His attention seemed particularly focused on her contributions to the team's success, noting how naturally she fell into leadership roles and how effectively she analyzed complex tactical situations. Excellent coordination on the final phase, Roberts commented as the exercise concluded. Chun, your communication with the air support element was particularly effective. Where did you learn those protocols? It was exactly the kind of pointed question Sarah had been hoping to avoid. The protocols she had used were advanced techniques not typically covered in basic training, and explaining her familiarity with them would require revealing experience she supposedly didn't possess. I studied various communication procedures during my administrative assignment, sir, Sarah replied. I wanted to understand how different elements of naval operations coordinated with each other. Roberts nodded, but his expression suggested he was filing away another piece of evidence that didn't quite fit the picture she had presented. As the week progressed, Sarah found herself under increasingly intense scrutiny. Roberts attended more of her training sessions than usual, asked pointed questions about her background and experience, and assigned her to leadership roles that tested her responses under pressure. Her fellow trainees noticed the additional attention, but interpreted it positively. Roberts really seems to have his eye on you, Jessica observed during lunch on Wednesday. I think he's grooming you for something special. If only she knew, Sarah thought. But she simply smiled and deflected the comment. He probably just wants to make sure everyone in the group is performing up to standard. Marcus shook his head. No, this is different. He's testing you specifically, pushing you to see how you handle complex situations. I've seen him do this before with trainees he thinks have exceptional potential. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on Sarah. Roberts was indeed testing her, but not for the reasons her friends imagined. He was trying to understand who she really was and why she was there. Thursday brought the week's most challenging exercise, a multi-day field training operation that would test everything the trainees had learned over the past 8 weeks. The scenario involved establishing a temporary base of operations, conducting reconnaissance missions, and coordinating with simulated air and sea support elements. Sarah's team was assigned one of the most complex mission objectives, requiring them to gather intelligence on enemy positions while maintaining operational security and preparing detailed reports for higher command. It was exactly the kind of challenge that would showcase the full range of her actual capabilities. As the exercise began, Sarah found herself facing a familiar dilemma. Performing at her true capability level would ensure her team's success, but would also provide Roberts with additional evidence that her background didn't match her abilities. Deliberately underperforming, however, would let down her teammates and compromise the training value of the exercise. She decided to aim for solid competence without exceptional excellence, contributing effectively to her team's efforts while avoiding the kind of standout performance that would raise additional questions. The first day of the exercise went according to plan. Sarah's team successfully established their base of operations and began their reconnaissance activities without incident. Her contributions were helpful but not remarkable, and she managed to avoid taking on the obvious leadership role that would have been natural for her. But on the second day, everything changed. The exercise scenario included a simulated emergency that required immediate tactical decision-making under pressure. A wounded team member needed evacuation, enemy forces were reportedly approaching their position, and communication with higher command had been temporarily lost. In the confusion of the moment, with teammates looking to her for guidance and time running out, Sarah's instincts took over. She rapidly assessed the tactical situation, developed a comprehensive response plan, and began issuing orders with the authority and competence of someone with extensive command experience. Marcus, you and Elena establish a defensive perimeter on the high ground to the north, she directed with crisp efficiency. Jessica, coordinate the evacuation with the medical team using the backup communication protocols. David, I need you to gather all sensitive materials and prepare them for emergency destruction if necessary. Her teammates responded immediately to her directions, recognizing competent leadership when they encountered it. The simulated emergency was resolved efficiently and effectively, with minimal confusion and optimal outcomes. But as the immediate crisis passed, Sarah realized what she had done. In the heat of the moment, she had revealed exactly the kind of advanced command capabilities that her supposed background couldn't explain. Commander Roberts had observed the entire sequence from his position with the exercise controllers. His expression as he approached their position was unreadable, but Sarah knew that her performance had provided him with the final piece of evidence he needed. Outstanding response to the emergency situation, Roberts said, addressing the team as a whole. Your coordination and decision-making under pressure were exemplary. His eyes met Sarah's as he continued. Chun, your leadership during the crisis was particularly effective. That kind of tactical competence doesn't develop overnight. Sarah felt the weight of his scrutiny and knew that the time for maintaining her cover was rapidly running out. Thank you, sir. I tried to apply the principles we've learned during training. Indeed, Roberts replied, but his tone suggested he wasn't buying her explanation. Principles that seemed to have been very thoroughly internalized. The remainder of the field exercise passed without major incident, but Sarah was acutely aware that Roberts was watching her every move. Her natural competence kept asserting itself despite her efforts to remain inconspicuous, and each demonstration of capability added to the growing pile of evidence that something about her story didn't add up. Friday evening brought the conclusion of the field exercise and a return to base for debriefing and evaluation. Sarah's team had performed exceptionally well, earning praise from all the instructors involved in the exercise. But she knew that her individual performance had raised questions that would need to be addressed. The weekend offered temporary respite from training pressures, but Sarah spent the time preparing for what she increasingly recognized as an inevitable confrontation. Roberts was too experienced and too thorough to let the inconsistencies slide much longer. Monday morning brought the call she had been expecting. Chun, report to my office immediately after morning formation. This time, Roberts wasn't alone. Seated beside his desk was Captain Warren, the advanced strategic operations instructor who had recognized Sarah during her earlier visit. Her presence suggested that Sarah's situation had escalated beyond the level of routine training program administration. "Please, have a seat, Chun," Robert said, his tone formally polite, but unmistakably serious. "I believe you've met Captain Warren." "Yes, sir," Sarah replied, settling into the chair and bracing herself for what was to come. Captain Warren leaned forward slightly, her expression professionally neutral, but alert. "Miss Chun, we have some questions about your background and your presence in this training program." Sarah felt the moment of truth arriving like an approaching storm. The careful deception she had maintained for 8 weeks was about to collapse, and she would need to decide how much of the truth to reveal. "I'm happy to answer any questions you might have," Sarah said, keeping her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. Roberts opened a folder on his desk and withdrew several documents. "Over the past several weeks, I've been documenting instances where your performance has exceeded what would be expected from someone with your stated background." He began reading from his notes. "Advanced tactical communication protocols, sophisticated understanding of multi-unit coordination, natural command presence under pressure, strategic thinking that suggests extensive operational experience." Warren picked up the thread. "Additionally, during my visit to this training program, I observed analytical capabilities and knowledge that seemed inconsistent with administrative background." Sarah realized that they had built a comprehensive case documenting her true capabilities. Any further attempt to maintain her cover would be insulting to their intelligence and professional competence. "Furthermore," Roberts continued, "I've conducted additional research into your background. The administrative assignment you've described did exist, but the person who held that position was someone with significantly more experience than you've claimed." Sarah felt her carefully constructed cover story collapsing around her. The time for deception was over, but the question remained. How much of the truth could she safely reveal? "I can see that you've done thorough research," Sarah said carefully. "What exactly are you asking me?" Warren's expression became more direct. "We're asking you to tell us who you really are and why you're here. The evidence suggests you have extensive military experience that you've been concealing. We need to understand your actual identity and your purpose in this training program." Sarah looked at both officers, recognizing that the moment of decision had arrived. She could continue to evade their questions, but that would likely result in a formal investigation that would expose everything anyway. Or she could trust these competent, professional officers with the truth and hope they would understand her motives. Taking a deep breath, Sarah made her choice. "My name is Admiral Sarah Chun," she said quietly, "and I've been attending this training program to gain insight into contemporary naval training methods from a trainee's perspective." The silence in the room was profound as both Roberts and Warren processed this revelation. Roberts' expression shifted from suspicion to shock, while Warren's face showed a mixture of recognition and understanding. "Admiral," Roberts said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're saying you're a flag officer?" Sarah nodded, reaching into her uniform pocket to withdraw the credentials she had carried throughout her time in the program, but never used. "Admiral Sarah Chun, Pacific Fleet Strategic Operations Command." Captain Warren studied the credentials carefully before looking up with an expression of professional respect mixed with amazement. "Admiral, I thought I recognized you during my presentation. But this..." She gestured at the training program setting. "This is highly unusual." "Yes," Sarah agreed. "It is." The silence in Commander Roberts' office stretched for what felt like an eternity. Sarah watched as both officers struggled to process the magnitude of what she had just revealed. Roberts stared at her credentials as if they might transform into something else if he looked at them long enough, while Captain Warren's expression cycled through recognition, understanding, and what might have been admiration. "Admiral," Roberts finally said, his voice carrying a mixture of respect and bewilderment. "With all due respect, ma'am, what the hell are you doing in my basic training program?" Sarah had rehearsed potential explanations for this moment, but actually sitting in front of 2 fellow officers and justifying her deception felt far more complex than she had anticipated. These weren't abstract authority figures. They were competent professionals whose programs she had infiltrated under false pretenses. "Commander Roberts, Captain Warren, I want to start by apologizing for the deception," Sarah began. "I know my presence here has put you both in a difficult position, and that wasn't my intention." Roberts leaned back in his chair, still processing the revelation. "Ma'am, I've been in the Navy for 22 years, and I've never encountered anything like this. I'm not sure there are protocols for discovering that one of my trainees is actually a flag officer. Captain Warren, who had recovered her composure more quickly, leaned forward with obvious curiosity. Admiral, what were you hoping to accomplish by attending basic training under an assumed identity? Sarah appreciated the directness of the question. I wanted to understand contemporary naval training from the ground up. As senior officers, we make decisions about training programs, resource allocation, and personnel development based on reports, statistics, and second-hand observations. I realized I had never actually experienced what we're asking our newest personnel to go through. Roberts shook his head slowly. You've effectively conducted an 8-week undercover assessment of naval training methodologies. What have you learned? Sarah felt a surge of relief at Warren's pragmatic response. Here was an officer who understood the potential value of what she had been doing, rather than focusing solely on the irregularity of her methods. More than I had hoped, and different things than I expected, Sarah replied. The technical aspects of your training programs are excellent, comprehensive, challenging, and well-designed. But what I hadn't anticipated was how much I would learn about the personal dynamics of training, the way relationships develop among trainees, and the perspective that people have when they're at the beginning of their careers rather than well-established in them. Roberts was still struggling with the situation. Ma'am, with respect, couldn't you have gained those insights through conventional observation and evaluation methods? I thought so, Sarah admitted. But it turns out that being observed changes behavior significantly. People act differently when they know they're being evaluated by senior leadership. What I experienced as a trainee was genuine, authentic relationships, honest reactions to training challenges, real insights into how your programs actually function. Warren nodded thoughtfully. That makes sense from a research perspective. Participant observation can provide insights that external evaluation might miss. Exactly. Captain Warren, your presentation 3 weeks ago was brilliant, but watching how trainees actually processed and discussed that information afterward gave me understanding that I never could have gained from instructor feedback alone. Roberts was beginning to look less overwhelmed and more intrigued by the implications of what Sarah had accomplished. What kind of insights, specifically? Sarah felt herself shifting into the analytical mode that characterized her professional work. Your physical training protocols are excellent, but I think there's room for more integration between physical challenges and tactical decision-making. The trainees respond very well to scenarios that combine both elements. She continued, drawing on 8 weeks of detailed observation. The simulation exercises are valuable, but the debriefing sessions afterward are where the real learning happens. The way you conduct those debriefs, Commander Roberts, is exemplary. You push people to think through their decisions without making them feel criticized for mistakes. Roberts looked pleased despite the unusual circumstances. Thank you, Admiral. That's something I've worked hard to develop. It shows. And, Captain Warren, your strategic operations presentation was perfectly pitched for the audience. The trainees discussed it for days afterward, and those discussions revealed understanding that went well beyond what they demonstrated during the formal session. Warren smiled. I'm gratified to hear that. But, Admiral, what about the other trainees? You've been living and training with these people for 8 weeks. They think they know you. How do you handle that aspect of the situation? This was the question Sarah had been dreading most. Her relationships with Jessica, Marcus, Elena, and the others had become genuinely meaningful to her. They had accepted her as a peer, supported her during challenging moments, and celebrated her successes without reservation. The thought of revealing her deception to them was painful. That's the most difficult part of this entire experience, Sarah admitted. These are good people who welcomed me and treated me as a friend. They deserve honesty, but I'm not sure how to provide it without undermining everything we've built together. Roberts leaned forward with obvious concern. Ma'am, with respect, those relationships were built on a fundamental deception. That's going to be difficult for them to process, regardless of how you handle the revelation. Sarah nodded sadly. I know. It's the one aspect of this experience that I genuinely regret. Captain Warren looked thoughtful. Admiral, what if we approach this as a learning opportunity for everyone involved? Your insights about training methods are valuable, but the trainees might also benefit from understanding the broader perspective you can provide. What do you mean? I mean, what if we revealed your identity in a context that emphasized the educational value of what's happened? Rather than focusing on the deception, we could frame it as an extraordinary opportunity for them to understand how their training connects to higher-level strategic thinking. Roberts looked intrigued by Warren's suggestion. That's an interesting approach. Admiral, you've gained unique insights into their potential and development. They could benefit tremendously from your perspective on their progress and their futures in naval service. Sarah considered the proposal. It offered a way to transform her deception into something that might actually benefit the people she had unknowingly deceived. How would that work practically? Warren was clearly developing the idea as she spoke. What if we organized a special session where you revealed your identity and shared your observations about the training program? You could discuss what you've learned about effective training methods, and they could gain insights into how senior leadership thinks about their development. It would be unprecedented, Roberts added. But then, this.